Welcome everyone to the second day of the Iowa Hunger Summit. Today we have a panel, What Does Hunger Mean to Our Workforce? And I am so pleased to welcome a number of panelists for a wonderful discussion. My name is Barbara Stinson. I am the new president of the World Food Prize Foundation. I've been here about 9.5 months and just so pleased to welcome all of you participating in the Hunger Summit and each of our panelists today. I want to start by just saying a little bit about the panel, and then I'll introduce all the speakers that you see here before you. So this session is really supported and brought about by Business Publications Corporation's initiative, Iowa Stops Hunger. What does hunger mean to our workforce? Iowa Stops Hunger is a new year-long statewide initiative with presenting sponsor Hy-Vee, and it was created by BPC to really drive awareness and action around hunger and food security in Iowa, especially in this really difficult year. So it's a 12-month initiative launched in June of this year with the goals of reaching Iowa's businesses, cultural and philanthropy communities, and much broader audiences to try to create ongoing awareness of food security and hunger issues here in Iowa. It's meant to educate Iowans and business partners and organizations about the food insecurity and hunger issues so many Iowans face. It's meant to inspire and equip businesses and individuals to take action to stop hunger in Iowa. So today, let me first introduce everybody so you can know everyone around the room. First, Chris Konetsky is the publisher of BPC, publisher and executive editor. Georgia Van Gundy is Executive Vice President and Chief Customer and Talent Officer at Hy-Vee. Angela Walker Franklin is President and CEO of Des Moines University. Bob Riley is Chairman of Riley Resource Group. Jeff Russell serves as President and CEO of Delta Dental of Iowa. And Daniel Hoffman-Zinnel is CEO of Proteus Incorporated. So welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being here today. Let me say just a little bit more about our panel discussion. So today what we're going to do is ask this panel of executive leaders from companies here in Iowa to explore how hunger and food security in Iowa touches our workforces, how it affects workers and therefore our overall economy. Today you'll learn more about how hunger affects families, individual lives at home, their productivity, and then ultimately the bottom line for our companies. Our leaders are going to share information, stories about how their companies are helping address hunger and food insecurity and what they're doing to support their workers. All of this meant to inspire other companies to do the same. Let me start then by introducing in more detail our moderator. Chris Konetsky, as I said, BPC, publisher and executive editor. He has a long history of work in business media and organizations. BPC is a business media organization that publishes the weekly magazine that we all know so well, and a variety of digital products featuring local business news. Chris, you come to us from such a broad background. Thank you so much for being here today. Everybody can read more about all of our panelists right there in your platform below the agenda. And Chris, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Barbara. I appreciate it. And thank you for having us today as part of the World Food Prize event today. Again, my name is Chris Konetsky. I'm the publisher and executive editor at the Business Record. And last spring, as the pandemic was in full swing and the shutdown was forcing layoffs and furloughs at historic rates, at the Business Record, we began hosting a variety of roundtables with community leaders in an effort to understand the needs of the community. One immediate need kept coming to the forefront, and that was food security. This summer, as Barbara mentioned, we began our Iowa Stops Hunger initiative to help educate and to help make sure that this not only was a short-term, not only while the this was really in the forefront, but that we were making sure that we were going to extend that throughout the course of the year to make sure that we are helping keep this at the forefront, because this isn't just a short-term problem, as you all know. This is something that it needs to be tackled over a long period of time. I'm excited to be here today as part of the initiative as we help support the World Food Prize and all the work that they do, and host a discussion about how this is affecting business, why it matters to our business leaders, and really spend some time illuminating how to engage with and perhaps better leverage the business community's resources to help with food insecurity. And I know we've got a great panel for you today to help us do that. I've got a variety of questions to ask the panelists today, and so I'm going to lead us through that. But if you have questions, I believe there's a button that will allow you to submit questions. I'll be able to see some of those on the back end. We'll try to incorporate those as we go throughout the process, so feel free to do that. If nothing else, that'll help guide the line of questioning today as well. Panelists, thank you for being here today. The first thing I want to spend some time on is helping to understand why business is involved in this issue. So our first question today that I'll have each of you answer is, why do you and your business believe that food insecurity is a business issue? And Angela, I'm going to go ahead and begin with you today.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris, and it's a pleasure to be a part of the panel today. Of course, Des Moines University, as a health sciences university, has a steep tradition of meeting the healthcare needs of the communities that our students, our future providers, serve. As an educational institution, we have several different variables here that I'd like to just highlight in terms of why we believe this issue is so important for us. First, we are training future health professionals. So it's important for us to have them understand the impact of food insecurity, hunger. They're meeting the healthcare needs of the communities that they serve. They actually need to understand and have an appreciation for how best to support and promote wellness and actually supporting communities. From our employees, we have a workforce here on campus of our faculty and staff, and we also provide health care. So in terms of our employees, those who are clinical versus non-clinical, those who are in the classrooms teaching and training, all of them are important to us as our workforce, because wellness is a core value here. So we have wellness pays programming, we have a fitness center, we really promote health and fitness on campus. We as a campus community focus on the Partnership of Healthy America that promotes wellness, because if we really are truly focused on wellness, the body is not well if it's not properly nourished. So we at Des Moines University understand the importance of that and the value around wellness and how best to impart that in terms of the workforce of our community here and the training of future health professionals so that we prepare them to meet the healthcare needs. And then the final piece is all about community engagement. We as a campus community are promoting and really involved in community outreach and being of service to the community. So not only our students, but our faculty, it's important, it's sort of ingrained in who we are as an institution, that we are of service to the community. So our community goes out to support communities that need care, from food shelters to promoting food drives to being of service to underserved communities by going out and being a part of that and being of service.
Thanks, Angela. Daniel?
Sure. Well, thank you, Chris, and welcome to all of the rest of the panelists. Produce, we're a multi-state nonprofit that provides services specifically to agricultural workers and their families. We do that through providing affordable health care, education assistance, and job training. And I think especially now, we all have recognized the important role that agricultural workers play in all of our lives as essential workers, and really being a part of not only the agricultural economy, but helping put food on all of our tables. And so it's really important for us as an organization that really serves farm workers to make sure that they have all of the access to resources, including access to nutritious food, so that they can be productive workers and be able to get out there and work in the fields. These workers are the most hardworking, grateful people I have ever encountered, and they're working sunrise to sunset 7 days a week in many cases during the summer. And it's really critical for them to have access to food, because if they don't, that decreases productivity, it decreases bottom lines for the company and overall our agricultural economy. And so we as an organization really focus on the social determinants of health, really providing access to a variety of resources to increase their income, to increase access to healthcare, and overall increase access to nutritious food as well.
Thanks, Daniel. Bob?
Thank you, Chris. Welcome again to all the panelists and to our audience. I'm Bob Riley from the Riley Resource Group, which is a collection of agricultural facing companies. And so we deal a lot with livestock and fertilizer and some of the other first line producers of food and nutrition in the state of Iowa. As you can probably know from being familiar with this system, 1 in 6 Iowans is food insecure. And so it's pretty easy to apply that old 6 degrees of separation to know that all Iowans know someone who knows someone that's hungry. So no matter what your employment situation, someone within reach is probably hungry. And then if an employee has to worry about food and rent and other basic necessities, it will be impossible for them to focus on the work at hand. And focus is really what an employer buys. And this focus deserves a fair price. So if an employee is food challenged, it is certain that other challenges are pervasive, like medical, housing, clothing, education, all of which sap the emotional, intellectual, and motivational energy of the employee, which costs the employer many dollars in lost productivity. So when people wonder, where is the effect of hunger on your business, you have to know that no matter how those ripples end up, people know people that are hungry, people are related to people that are hungry, people are hungry, and with that, we end up with lost productivity and issues that pervade the workforce that we need to deal with. And so as employers, it's our responsibility to try to do something about this.
Thanks, Bob. Georgia?
Thanks, Chris. Well, obviously, with Hy-Vee, we deal with food. So Hy-Vee is, our mission is to make lives easier, happier, and healthier. In our 8 states, we have 276 stores, 174 C-stores, and 370 pharmacies and clinics. It's personal to us because we specialize in health and wellness. As a company, the health and strength of our communities has always been a top priority. Food insecurity impacts the children and citizens of these communities and causes angst, leads to more overarching community issues. Plus, like Angela talked about, we believe it's our civic duty that people don't go hungry. And we've been participating in a lot of different opportunities, which I know we'll get to later, where our employees have the opportunity to engage within the communities on this issue in particular. But there's a lot of activity that we have always done around food insecurity and continue to do going forward.
Thanks, Georgia. Jeff?
Thanks, Chris, and appreciate being on the panel. From Delta Dental's perspective, I feel like maybe we're a little bit new to this conversation. Obviously, as a health and wellness company, we provide dental and vision insurance to 1.2 million members. And over the last few years, as a health and wellness company, that we've tried to expand our focus from not only oral and vision health to overall health. And as we did that, our first focus was really around mental health. Obviously an important topic. And as we've gotten into the pandemic in particular, I think we've realized the importance of food and food insecurity related to overall health, as was mentioned. So if you look at our 3,700 businesses that we serve, we're in the Medicaid business, so we serve the state of Iowa and those members, and 1.2 million members. What we realized is that if we weren't engaged in this conversation, we weren't fulfilling our entire mission around overall health and wellness. So I wouldn't say that we have the long history of that, but as we've thought about why is it an issue for business, Bob's number of 1 in 6, if you take 1.2 million members, that means 200,000, give or take, on any given day, have a level of food insecurity. And if they can't work through that, then obviously some of the other things that will promote their overall health and wellness probably don't get done as well. So that being said, we know that that our employees probably have issues with this as well. And certainly to Bob's point, they know somebody who does. And so as we looked at the pandemic, one of my favorite sayings around this is that when a crisis happens, does your team run away from the fire or towards the fire? And we thought this was probably one of the most important issues that we needed to run towards as we went into this time. So I'm anxious to learn from the panelists as well. And like I said, we're early in our journey and how we address food insecurity in the state.
And thank you all for your opening comments. And Daniel, I want to go back to something you touched on, and you talked specific about worker productivity. And obviously, some of the jobs that the employees that you're trying to serve are very physically demanding. Could you talk a little bit about perhaps what maybe you've seen in either the early stages or maybe as the pandemic has extended outward in terms of what you've seen as far as productivity?
Yeah, I think COVID definitely has thrown a wild wrench into all of our workforce, but especially within the agricultural community as a whole. Early on, we wanted to be as proactive as possible and create a very bold strategy to get testing out to as many workers as possible. And so ultimately that turned into a daily call we had with the governor's staff, IDPH, IWD, Homeland Security, and the State Hygienic Lab to create a robust strategy to get as many tests out as possible. And the whole goal was to mitigate spread as much as possible so that our workers who are coming in, thousands of migrants that are coming into our state, could continue to work fully. We did have some positives, but thankfully we had some funds to isolate them in hotels. Produce was able to pay for those, and we were able to bring them 2 hot meals a day, which I think was just the humane thing to do for our workers. Over time, we definitely saw workers that did test positive needed access to nutritional food in order to recover. So I think productivity as a whole was able to be pretty stable in Iowa because we were able to mitigate spread as much as possible. But I think access to the nutritional food definitely helped with recovery, and ultimately, knock on wood, we only had a few hospitalizations and no deaths that we were taking care of any farm workers. So I think we had a fairly successful summer in helping to make sure that our agricultural workforce was safe, had access to food and all of the resources they needed.
Georgia, you have at Hy-Vee such a diverse workforce, both folks on the floor, in the stores, in offices. Can you talk a little bit about that dynamic and how Hy-Vee's tried to approach that when it comes to worker productivity, when you've seen hunger perhaps within the workforce itself?
So just the dynamic with our people?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I think, this is an issue that they work with each day, each store, just to give you a little bit of background of our structure. So each store, our store directors, it's autonomous. So then they manage the store the way that they want to. But this is a top of mind issue for all of our stores and here within our corporate office. So there's a lot of activity that they're doing themselves within the community and with their employees year round, to be honest with you. They've got locally, a number of them have relationships with their local food banks. Again, and that helps engage our employees in working with those food banks. And then also from us, from a corporate perspective, we've been doing a lot of work with food banks and others and food rescue, again, for quite some time. I'll tell you it's been interesting for our employees as well, is especially during COVID and then also during the derecho, just making sure that people did have food during these times. So for example, we did a fresh produce contactless drive-through giveaway where we had 115 events. So we had nearly 100,000 pounds that were donated, more than 1.3 million pieces of produce. And so that's something that our people worked with in their communities to get that out for folks. We had more than 1 million in supplies donated to 17 Feeding America food banks. So that included nearly 450,000 to 4 Iowa-based food banks that support all 99 counties, just as an example. So like I said, there's a lot of initiatives that we do all the time. And I think that in the stores for our employees look out for each other. And so I think they're always looking for ways to support if they know that our employees have some type of issue within the food insecure space to take care of them.
Jeff, you mentioned being relatively new, but that you had put a lot of effort behind mental health. I imagine the connection between mental health and food security makes for an easy entry point in some ways to try to figure out. Can you talk a little bit about maybe that dynamic at play in your decision to get involved into helping with food insecurity?
Yeah, I think over the past few years, as we've looked to expand kind of our philanthropic efforts and how we help support communities, it seemed like mental health was, obviously it's a huge issue in the state. And as we got into the pandemic and sort of what can we do to help, the first thing we realized was that, we really needed to help shore up some of these nonprofits who are really focused on some of the things Georgia was talking about around food insecurity and that. And so that was really the focus of our, first effort in the spring of about 360,000 was turned out to be about $500,000 donations to, on the boots on the ground kind of organizations, from what I would call a closet food pantry to the biggest food bank in the state, or other people who are working on some of the social determinants that Daniel was talking about. So I think what it really said is, okay, if we're going to be about the overall health and wellness of the people that we serve, that's really the base level. And so how do we sort of pivot there in this time? I mean, it's really sort of opened my eyes, at least I think our eyes as an organization, to really what the issue is. Our corporate offices are in Johnston, and you might suggest, urban or suburban Des Moines doesn't have those issues. And actually, even before this last year, we were working with United Way and about the number of students that take backpacks home with food for the weekend because they're food insecure. And so I think it touches all pieces of our community. We might look at one piece or another piece, but what we realized was that if I think to an earlier point, if we can't deal with the issue around food insecurity and the people have the proper nutrition, their ability to live a overall healthier and happier life is kind of unlikely.
You mentioned the economic effect perhaps on a business, and there's also the human element. And so one of the things that I think maybe we've, I don't know if struggle is the right word, but when we try to talk about this, there's obviously an effect on business, an effect on your bottom line component. And there's also this really real human element. Can you talk a little bit maybe about that dynamic and how you've tried to approach that with your company?
Yeah, I mean, so if you look at, again, I'll just go back to the numbers. So 1.2 million members, if you just use Bob's 1 in 6 number, it means 200,000 of our customers are addressing some level of security on a daily basis. Part of the value proposition that we offer to businesses is to help their employees become more productive, right? Preventive visits around dental, preventive visits around vision are all part of being healthier overall. And so I think that, from a philanthropic effort, we realized that, there's probably this hierarchy of needs, if you will. And if you can't address the food insecurity component, you're unlikely to get to the other pieces that are in that world. So, again, I think we're trying to figure out what's the best way to do this. When we talk about efforts, one of the things that we did during the pandemic is obviously dental offices and vision offices to some extent were closed down during most of some of March and April and May. And we gave premium credits back to our group of customers, insurance customers, our individual customers. For our individual customers, one of the things we said is, okay, how can we get them involved in this conversation? It's one thing for us to spend foundation and corporate dollars around this. And so, our average premium is $30 per individual per month. So if we gave, 50% credit, that might have been, $15 for 2 months, that's $30. What we decided to do was if they wanted to donate that money to the Food Bank Association of Iowa, so all the major food banks we distribute that to, we'd match that money. So I think part of that was about how do we get people involved in this conversation on a small level where we can use some of our resources to match that, and we're able to do that. We got great response to that, that at a time when people were probably not paying attention, candidly, to one little premium credit of their dental or vision premium. But we thought that was one way to get people involved. And I think that's probably the broader conversation is how do we do that, writ large amongst corporations, businesses, and individuals across the state.
Bob, we spoke a little bit about this, and you talked a little bit about how a lot of times efforts are focused at where the need is most when it's present, right? Trying to solve hunger at its when it's needed. you talked about the systematic situation around that is leading to that, and how to approach that. And from your perspective, and I know the way you think as a business guy, what's your approach when you're trying to think about tackling this from a longer term perspective rather than just on the actual need delivery?
Well, that's a complex question because it's a systemic issue. I mean, when you think of what's going on in America today and the kind of the collective PTSD that everybody is suffering from, and the chaos that's going on, there's a phenomenal uncertainty about the future with this pandemic, with a trade war, with this, with that. And so I think a lot of people feel that there's this loss of locus of control, and that provides all this anxiety, and that children will not succeed, and that money will be insufficient, and time is our enemy. I mean, there's all kinds of things that wrap around this problem that are interrelated, and therefore we have to look at them all as a system. It's always the old saw of give a man a fish or teach a man to fish is okay for the moment, but it doesn't really address the systemic issues that we have in our system. And so really we need to look at the root causes of some of these issues. And in my mind, a lot of it results around poverty. If we don't have the right systems in place in order to allow people to have a living wage in our society, then we've got a real problem that is going to be almost impossible to fix, because it will require so many more band-aids without fixing the systemic issue. We're going to end up with just always doing a whack-a-mole trying to figure out how to fix this. I remember the quote from FDR that said, "No business which depends for its existence on paying less than living wages to its workers has any right to continue in this country." And by living wage, I mean more than a bare subsistence level. I mean that the wages of decent living. And I think that's probably one of the things that I look at in our systemic look, that in because of the inability to have enough money to pay for the basic necessities of life. Jeff talked about that Maslow's hierarchy. Until we deal with the bottom tier of food and shelter and clothing, until people are comfortable in that area, we can't start talking about other things that are higher level accomplishments. And so we have to make sure that our system is set up to cover all those things at the bottom in some fashion or another, and not play this low road capitalism game of trying to get the cheapest we can get in terms of labor and wages, but instead try to figure out how much can we pay our employees and still do a good job managing our expenses to provide for low cost items. But at that point, you now have the recipe for covering a lot more of the basic necessities than what we've had before.
I've always liked you talk about polarities all the time, and I've always liked that idea of it's not one or the other. It's not holding the canned food drive or working on the systemic problem that's going to have a result many years down the line. But I think if I'm a business, what advice, and I'll open this up for the whole panel, what advice would you have for other businesses that are maybe looking to start and get involved in some fashion? Yeah, Angela?
I would just, and I couldn't agree more with what Bob just said there in terms of the systemic issues around poverty and hunger. People don't have the resources to be able to live a healthy life. If the body's not well because it's not properly nourished. So that's just fundamental. In terms of things to do, just from our vantage point here as a higher ed institution, we have 4 vision statements about who we are as an institution and our way forward. And it's all about educational excellence, clinical excellence, research excellence. But the one most pertinent to the conversation today is all about advocacy and civic engagement and public policy around the social determinants of health. So in terms of those Band-Aids, we need a lot of those Band-Aids. We need to have everyone doing their part to help stop the bleed. Unfortunately, given what's happening in the world today, it's going to get worse. So I would agree. We all need to be working on all of these things all at the same time, but getting everyone to agree is part of the challenge. Does everyone agree that the issue is really around poverty, and how do we best address that? So just some of the things that we're doing here. Wellness is a core value. We indoctrinate that into our campus community. When our students and employees arrive, they hear about that. Just as an example of something that we do here, our students get points for community service. Our students are pretty amazing at how they go out and be of service to the community. They see this as a basic need. We now even, for our orientation, we bring in meals from the heartland. Day one on campus as a new entering student, they are indoctrinated into being of service to the community. Our employees get 16 hours of paid community service leave to go out and be of service. We have partners in the community, whether it's Food Bank of Iowa or United Way. Those partners are a part of who we are as a campus community, and we support them. So it's really important for our students to hear about it and understand it when they come to our campus, but our employees also. So that's how we are putting those Band-Aids on to try to stop the bleed in the small way that we can here. But I think if others join with us and become a part of trying to fix the problem, while someone else is trying to deal with the issues around the systemic issues around poverty, we're all in this together. We've all got to do our part to address the needs that are out there.
I'll add on to part of what Angela said. I think as a business, I think you need to find something that is sustainable and thoughtful. I think that people can engage in, and then things break off from then. That, as I mentioned before, health and wellness is important to us. I would give an example for Hy-Vee. We have our one-step program. So Hy-Vee one-step products help improve the well-being of our communities around the world. So if you buy these products, they help feed hungry, in which we take some of those dollars and participate, for example, in Meals from the Heartland. We build wells. We do other civic projects around communities from that one-step program in particular. But then the other things, we try to be innovative. We have our healthy U-mobiles, which are going out to the communities and providing flu shots and different things like that. And we're leveraging them also for food insecurity. So we're really trying to sit down and think about the different resources that we have, other than the things that we have done, and be more innovative to bring solutions to those communities that don't necessarily have solutions being brought to them, whether they're more of your rural communities or just some of your, like I think about, it's kind of interesting. So we have a Fast and Fresh, which is one of our C stores, and it's in a part of Des Moines that I would say is more of a food desert. So our Fast and Fresh, when I say it's a convenience store, it really is where you can go in and get a lot more grab and go food, and also freshly prepared food. And it's gone crazy, but it's a great example of that was an area that had a food desert. So we're bringing lower cost solutions to communities that don't have those solutions within them, as far as just a business model. And then these other things that I talked about are more from our civic and community perspective, but really being thoughtful and sustainable than with something like our one-step program that we have.
Chris, if I can add on to that, I think one of the other interesting things about this is, certainly there's the conversation around hunger and food insecurity. From a business perspective, there's also this idea about nutrition and eating well. I think that's where Georgia was going a little bit. So I think one of the things businesses can do is start to promote that in their own business, right? The idea about the overall health and wellness starts with nutrition. I have the pleasure of being on the Healthiest State Initiative board, whose goal is to make Iowa the healthiest state in the country. Our obesity numbers are pretty bad. They're 48th to 49th in the country in terms of that. And a program that we have around Double Up Food Bucks, which is a partnership with the state, with USDA, Hy-Vee, Fairway, and some other private businesses from funding perspective, provide, if you're on SNAP, the Supplemental Assistance Program, and you buy $1 of fruits and vegetables, you get a coupon for $1 the next time you're there in fruits and vegetables. And being able to help folks eat healthier in that environment, I think has been good. The reality of that is that we were provided about $1 million in CARES funding through the state, and that we went through that with Fairway and Hy-Vee across the state in about 75 days. So that shows, the demand that's out there for that. So these are people who are already spending some of their own dollars to leverage additional dollars. And I think that shows that. But I think part of it's not just about, that we need to have broader food programs, which we do, but what are we actually putting in our bodies collectively?
I'd like to weigh in a little bit. Georgia and I are the two people on this panel who are directly involved with feed and food. And so these are the areas that we can reach out through our networks and do more on the Band-Aid approach, at least, than anyone else. We work in our organization directly with other trade organizations, such as the Iowa Poultry Association, the Iowa Turkey Federation, Iowa Pork, and Iowa Cattle, in addition to private companies, to promote food programs. Again, many of these are Band-Aids, but they're the start of how we get this thing rolling. The one with which I'm most proud to be associated is the Iowa Poultry Association, sponsoring the Cracking Hunger approach, which contributes 46,000 dozen eggs per month to food banks and food pantries. That's over 550,000 eggs per month, or over 6.6 million eggs per year, going from Iowa egg farmers to hungry people. So these are the types of things that we can do through the Poultry Association. The pork folks have the same types of programs, same thing for turkey and cattle. So we're trying to fix these Band-Aid things to make sure that those are going in the right direction. Then when we're talking about the root causes and some of the systemic issues, that's where I'm working in the policy arena, trying to make people understand, as Jeff talked about, the recognizing those root causes of hunger, the societal issues found in basically low road capitalism, where we end up with an inability to have equitable wages for people to get out of the poverty that causes this whole cycle to start.
Daniel, it looked like you had a comment as well.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think the one thing that I would encourage all businesses to do is to lead with racial equity. I think looking at the One Economy report, we see the intersection of race and income and how systemic racism has plagued our community and our country for the last 400 years. And so I think there's a really important component of really leading with racial equity, thinking about the postmodern slavery era that we're in and how it's still connected to slavery. So I won't get into full detail on that, but I would encourage you to just look up postmodern slavery era to learn more about how our current system is still connected with slavery and how it has built this country. So that's my recommendation. Check out the For Equity tool. It's a great tool for business leaders to use when making important decisions. But I think it's important to acknowledge our past as business leaders, acknowledge maybe wrongdoings or things we've done wrong, to develop trust by sharing that vulnerability so that we can move forward with these important conversations.
It's a really good point, Daniel. Thanks for bringing it up, especially when you look at the way, of course, that this is affecting, you can't just look at it as the whole population. Looking very specifically at different segments of the population and how they're affected, of course, is so important with this. One of the things that I'm curious about is, oftentimes Bob, you gave some examples of some good partnership opportunities and some ways that businesses are partnering in. When you're approached about different opportunities, what are some things that would help an initiative potentially be something that you'd be wanting to get involved in, and maybe think about putting that through the lens of all the great organizations around the state that are working on these issues, that are maybe trying to bring an ally like a business on board to help support or fund. And Jeff, maybe I'll start with you. Through the Dental Foundation, especially since you guys have made a bit of a change in how you're delivering some of those things.
Yeah, so as we look from our foundation's perspective and where we are focused, we've recast our strategic plan. I think everybody was in the process of this 2020 visioning process, but two, I think, important things. One is this idea of focusing on overall health. At some level, that becomes, how do you create a program that ends up being sustainable over time? Like, what is the sustainability of it? Obviously there are programs that need to be funded every year, and certainly we understand that, but are there opportunities to create sustainability, partnering with government, partnering with other foundations, partnering with businesses? I'll use like Double Up Food Bucks with Hy-Vee and Fairway. They do in-kind matches in that environment to be able to do that, so that becomes a more sustainable program over time. We too have taken a look from an equity lens, and I think that when we look at those things, so not only racial equity, but other barriers to health in that, and kind of getting back to the social determinants component of health around that. So I think to some extent, and maybe the third one, if I can say that, is that you're not reinventing the wheel. I think sometimes, there's this idea that says, well, let's go do our own program that looks like this, as opposed to partnering with others that are doing that to create better scale. I mean, we talk about that on the business front all the time, that you've got to be able to create scale to be sustainable at some level. And I think that, there's lots of need in the world. I think the question is how are people addressing that in a way that can be sustainable, that's not reinventing the wheel, and that allows us to feel like we can actually move the needle on this issue, as opposed to maybe put some Band-Aids on it.
I'll open that same question up to anybody else that wants to chime in on ways that perhaps folks could approach business. Georgia?
Yep, I'll just echo what Jeff said. I do think it's something that's sustainable. And, so for example, even our partnership with business publications, I mean, it's something that we just wanted to elevate the issue from a public relations, public affairs perspective, so that it's just more top of mind. So that's getting the issue out there. And then you have your activation part of it, So for example, I think I mentioned briefly, but we have food bank partnerships. So like during civil unrest, now this was in Minneapolis, but we had nearly 800,000 donated food and supplies to area food banks and nonprofits. And we did a big stuff a truck event up there where we had that helped local nonprofits over 12 of the cities in that area. But we also can bring other people to the table. So in July, we had an in summer hunger event. We partnered with Kellogg's and Keurig's, Dr. Pepper. There's 1.5 million meals donated across 17 Feeding America food banks. So you can see there with that one, we had partnerships with some of our vendors that we have. And then also back to what Jeff said, which I think is important, is that it's a sustainable organization that has broader outreach. But then that's not to say that we wouldn't look at innovative opportunities as well. We've had somebody here more recently come to us with a innovative partnership with some different people that maybe you wouldn't necessarily think of, but then provides a greater reach and just an innovative way to maybe get food from our stores out to more people that need it. So it's again, an echo kind of what Jeff said, but just some examples as well.
Just going to offer too that clearly the group here today represents people with like minds, that we sort of have a united front. We represent organizations, businesses that all believe that this is an important thing to address. But there's this cognitive dissonance, and it was alluded to a little bit by Bob, that we are talking about a basic fundamental issue of feeding hunger, and food insecurity. We all can agree that there's a real problem out there, and there's systemic issues that are underlying all of this, but not everyone's necessarily saying the same things that we're saying today. So there's this disconnect from seeing what the real issues are and the real needs on one hand, and when you bring in issues around equity and Daniel's point of historically, there's some fundamental issues that have allowed things to evolve to this place. We got to be able to have that tough conversation to really address it and call it out. And then there are those who may not necessarily want to point fingers there or look to the past. We've got to have those difficult conversations around how it is that we are this country, the United States of America, and have still major issues around equity, major issues around food insecurity, not being able to have a livable wage. All these things are just fundamental, and it goes counter to who we say we are as an institution or a country. This cognitive dissonance is something that I think maybe needs to be at the forefront of this. So those of us with like minds sort of have this united front to be able to say, we all believe these things to be true. Therefore, we all can try to address them with the same voice. And sometimes I wonder if maybe we're not all speaking from the same song sheet.
That is so true, Angela. The recognizing those root causes of hunger. We can talk all we want all day long about organizing and getting really good at giving out a can of soup. But until we get into that root cause of those societal issues, basically starting with low road capitalism, which basically says winner take all in terms of an approach to economics, and it puts profits way before people and builds into our life, our everyday life, these socioeconomic divisions that have been established. So it's an equity issue, it's an historic issue. It stems from enslavement and goes continually this forward. What Daniel talked about having to do with this the modern approach to racism, and it's not just racism; it's a whole socioeconomic caste system that we've established, and that's why we're running around trying to find cans of soup. So until we fix the one, we will be continually chasing hungry people, trying to give them food to get them through the day. But they're going to be there tomorrow until we start fixing the system further upstream.
I imagine there are folks along a spectrum, right? And it might not necessarily be all the way resistant and all the way in total unity and support. And I would imagine focusing on this group perhaps might not be the place to put the initial energy. But if you're talking to that middle group, maybe they're not quite sure, or they haven't spent a lot of time considering it. What are some things that you would advise folks to use to help move them along that spectrum a little bit in terms of why this is so important to a business? If you were trying to make the case to somebody that maybe wasn't quite so sure.
No, I'll just offer one suggestion. The phrase walk a mile in my shoes. You think about people need to be able to experience and understand what it feels like. Maybe you all did this, but we at DMU did the SNAP challenge. So we actually had our students, faculty, all trying to imagine what it means to live as an individual receiving SNAP benefits. And the difficulty of being able to provide a meal for your family on $4 a day, I think, which was about the amount. There was a different level of awareness and understanding of what it really meant to be hungry and not having enough resources to meet your family's needs. And I think that exercise alone on our campus raised a level of awareness so that people could really see that we're not talking about people gouging and taking more than they need, their fair share. They're just getting the basics, and even the basic doesn't go enough. So this idea of maybe trying to understand what it feels like and understand the experience of someone who is not just trying to be lazy and not work. There are issues and situations that cause them to be in this situation that they're in, that they're not able to provide. Walk a mile in someone else's shoes.
I think one thing Angela just said at the very end there that I think is important, and it's from a policymaker. So now I'm talking about having a lot of years working with policymakers, is that oftentimes people think that people who are on programs are not wanting to try to help get themselves better, which is definitely not true. And so I think the point that she just made there, it's I'll just give an example. Angela and I have worked, we've been on the United Way board together. And one of the issues that we've worked on is childcare assistance and making sure that lower income people have childcare assistance while they are trying to get raised and do better and not lose all of their benefits. And so when you're talking to a policymaker who doesn't even understand how much daycare is, like I'll have the conversation and they'll say, well, how much, is daycare? Well, it's, a couple $1,000s a month, depending on how many kids you have. And they're just floored because they don't understand that. And instead, sometimes the first thought is, oh, they just don't want to get off a program. And that's not true. And so I think it's really helping policymakers as well, Angela, you know, walk in those shoes and really understand what it is like. It's not people not wanting to get off of programs. It's sometimes there are barriers within those programs that they can't overcome to get off of them. And so just really helping them understand, policymakers is the them here, what that means and what it's going to take to help these people, individuals who are impacted, get off the programs like they want to.
Daniel?
I hate to make assumptions, but I picture the people who are maybe on the fence or maybe a little bit resistant are people that look like me. And so I would challenge them to think about themselves or their family. I'm a child of the 80s farm crisis who can still smell food stamps and went to WIC clinics on a regular basis as a child. And without programs like that, my family wouldn't have the access to resources they needed, and I wouldn't be sitting in this seat today. And so I think it's really about bringing Georgia and Angela's points to home of making that connection and sharing those personal stories of how it connects to them as an individual, but then also bringing in new stories to share about farm workers that we work with. They're the most hardworking people I have ever met, and they do this all always with a smile on their face to us. They're so resilient. They just want a better life for their family and for their kids. And so I think storytelling is going to be hopefully our biggest way of moving this forward.
Chris, I guess I'll just speak from our perspective. So, you know, my point of view is that while I'm sure there are folks that are resistant, I think, you know, what we've seen as we've had some of these natural disasters like the derecho is that Iowans want to help their neighbor. I think that's true of the business community as well. I think sometimes it's, you know, we had this kind of issue when we started down the work around mental health, knowing it's a big opportunity, but where do you start, right? I mean, there's so many different pieces from a need perspective, and you want to make a systemic difference, right? We've talked about that. Where do you start? I think the food insecurity, sort of the overall food nutrition category is the same piece. I understand the policy component on that. But from a business perspective, I think you have to draw a pretty clear line between what is the issue and how do we help. And you know, luckily we have foundation staff that can dig in and talk to communities and understand where the best opportunity is for us to invest our dollars. But not every business has that, and I think that you know, that issue about where do you start is almost so overwhelming when you enter into a new arena that it's pretty easy just to go back to what you've done before because you understand it. I think the other piece, and again, I'll make a correlation to mental health here, is how do we sort of eliminate the stigma around food insecurity, right? So we've talked a lot, I think, in the state over the last few years about the stigma of mental health. Make It Okay is a program that the Healthiest State has started around mental health. How do we do that around food insecurity so that it's not that hidden issue of that, it's going to get taken care of by SNAP. Just let that be the issue. Let that be the answer. And so I think that piece around that, especially maybe in our rural communities, has an opportunity for us to continue to elevate the conversation.
Well, and I think that we need to look at, from a corporate standpoint in business, we need to look at what we can do to lead in this area, especially in the systemic side. Rich Harwood was just here in town. Suzanne Minnick brought him in, and he's got a book called Stepping Forward, which is local people in a grassroots area stepping forward to fix systemic issues. A few years ago, we had Sam Williams come to talk to the partnership. And his book, the CEO is Urban Statesman, determined that we couldn't get much done in Washington and we couldn't get much done up on the Hill here in Iowa. So it was probably up to the CEO of these companies that are prevalent in the area and have influence in the area to help fix some of these issues. So I think as a corporate person, it's our responsibility to really step forward and see what we can do to influence the policies that will allow this to dissipate over time so that we can fix this issue from in essence, from the top down and ground up.
Well, we are just about, we've got about 5-6 minutes here. And so I want to give each panelist an opportunity to give a final closing thought And if you could maybe put that final thought through a lens of maybe something business could be doing, try to give a takeaway, something that maybe could help a business give that first step towards getting involved in some fashion. But feel free to give a final takeaway. While you think about your final takeaway, just a couple quick things that I want to make sure the audience knows about too, that we're involved in our next event in the Iowa Stops Hunger series that we're putting on that Barbara had mentioned is on November 4th. And we're going to specifically be addressing policy, some of the things that Bob has brought up today and that all the panelists have talked about, some of the policy drivers that lead to hunger. So that's going to be the focus of that event. It's free. You can sign up at iowastopshunger.com. And while you're there, you can also sign up for our monthly e-newsletter that we've started as a part of the Iowa Stops Hunger initiative to help raise awareness. That's going out to more than 10,000 business folks once a month. And it's collecting all the stories that we're providing throughout the course of the month that our newsrooms from both DSM and Business Record are reporting on. This is something that our team is spending a lot of time on to try to make sure we're helping raise awareness and bringing in all the different aspects to it. So we'd appreciate you considering signing up for that so that you and your team could be plugged in to this as well. Within there, there's also some easy ideas each month of ways that you could engage your team or yourself in this in some fashion as well. So we'd encourage you to take a look at that. All right, final question, and we're going to go ahead and we'll start with, let's go ahead and start with Jeff this time since we made you go last time. So Jeff, give us a final closing thought.
So again, thanks for allowing us to be on the panel. Again, I think as an organization, while we're experts in a number of things, this is an area we're not experts in. We've gone through this journey of exploration about what the issues are, what are the short-term issues, what are the longer-term systemic issues, how can we play a positive role in helping serve our communities. I would leave sort of from a business perspective, more of a personal point of view, which is it's pretty easy as a corporate leader not to do something that you're uncertain about. When you put yourself out there in terms of trying to get involved and you don't know what the issues are, that's a harder place to be than sort of the tried and true perspective. And my point of view, I think on this, and I think our learning as an organization is start somewhere, whether it's small, and begin to understand what those issues are. There are lots of great organizations that can help with that. And I would say, so, no matter how small, just start somewhere.
Bob?
Well, I'm always wondering, what do employers and the businesses they run have to do with hunger? That shouldn't be our realm per se, but it always is. Let me tell you the story that really resonates with me. I spied this farmer working in the field, and I could see that he was elderly and he was planting pecan trees. And I know that those are slow growing, and I asked, why do you plant them? And you probably will never live to gather a single nut from these trees. And the old man looked me in the eye and said, I plant these trees because all my life I've eaten pecans from trees that I did not plant. And so when we think of what we can do now for the future, we can plant the seeds of systemic change today and hope that as time marches on, that we can figure out how to make this work. Most people who are fortunate enough to attend this Hunger Summit are probably not working an extra shift so they could take time off to attend it. We're not close to those, yet we are connected. The 6 degrees of separation applies here. But the people who suffer the most aren't in the room, and they're shut out because of circumstances that are probably out of their control, but maybe in our control and in the control of the people that are watching this panel. So I would say, as Jeff says, do something as quickly as you can to fix the system that is as broken as it is, so that we can get to the bottom of this. Thank you.
Angela?
I would come from a position of representing higher ed and thinking first about the real value of education, not just health sciences, which is my institution, but in order to deal with some of the systemic issues we've talked about, having people to have access to opportunity, whether it's in exposing and encouraging kids to think about, college and trade programs, training programs, to find a way to encourage and motivate individuals to be educated and trained so that they can make that livable wage. That would be an important message. Education is key to people being able to find their way out of poverty. And then from the vantage point of being of service to communities, we will forever be advocates for supporting communities, focusing on the social determinants of health, being of service from our students to our faculty, our staff, all given service to be able to be the Band-Aid to help in the small way that we can to meet some of the needs out in the community.
Thanks, Angela. Georgia?
Well, we don't talk about this a lot, but last year alone, we gave $54 million back in donations, and a lot of that is food. So it is something that we live and breathe every day here at Hy-Vee. So it's easy for us to think about this issue and become involved, and also to promote it, and working with those from an advocacy perspective. We could probably work a little bit more on the policy side of things, though, as I listen a little bit to this conversation. And I think things have already been said in this space. I mean, it's not, again, we live and breathe it every day here at Hy-Vee. So we know the connections to make, but they're not difficult to make in how you can work with people just to help them understand what programs are out there, have good partners. But I also do think it's important to figure out, as we've talked about here, how to be an advocate for those these are the people who that typically are impacted by this, don't have a voice, don't have somebody who's really working with policymakers and other people to help them. And so it's great to give the money that we give. It's great to give the donations. And I'm always a fan of advocacy for those who don't have that voice. So it's how can we all figure out how to be that advocate for them as well?
Daniel, final thought. Wrap us up.
I'll try to be really brief. One thing we haven't talked about today, but I wanted to bring it front of mind for business leaders is immigration reform. I've been really proud of our business leaders for stepping up and really pushing for that. And I think it's so critical we move forward on that. Proteus, in partnership with Alexi Toe and American Friends Services Committee, have provided over $250,000 to immigrant families who don't qualify for governmental assistance with access to financial resources during COVID. And we have over $750,000 available right now. So if you know of any immigrant family that is in need, go to our Facebook and encourage them to apply.
Thanks, Daniel, and thank you to all our panelists. Again, my name is Chris Kineski. If I can ever be of help, if our staff can ever be of any help, please feel free to reach out our way. Our news teams are working and reporting on this issue all the time. I'm going to turn it over to Megan, and a big thank you again to our panelists today. Megan?
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you to the impressive executive leadership on the panel today, Angela Walker-Franklin, Georgia Van Gundy, Bob Riley, Jeff Russell, and Daniel Hoffman-Zinnel. This array of business represented in this group, I think, really demonstrates how hunger is not a single issue, and it's not a small issue. It's widespread and it's systemic. As Bob mentioned at the start of the panel, 1 in 6 Iowans are food insecure. I'm really heartened from this conversation by the programs that are underway currently and the ability to address those immediate needs, the Band-Aids that we discussed, as well as the deeper conversation that happened and needs to happen on the historic structures that have brought us to this place and the real need for policy change. As you all demonstrated today, there's an undeniable need for systemic change. And in order to accomplish this, we need the partnership, we need the community, and we need these difficult conversations partnered with action. So we really appreciate the leadership of the business community and the many resources that all of our speakers today mentioned. We're working hard to collect all of these resources and send them out to you, audience members, in our daily digest. So be on the lookout for that later today. Audience members, please continue to share your reflections in the chat below. And if you have any questions that you'd like to send directly to the speakers, you can use that Submit a Question to Speakers button. A final thank you to the Business Public Corporation for organizing the panel today and for their initiative, Iowa Stops Hunger. Our next session, Federal Nutrition Programs and the COVID-19 Emergency, will begin in a moment.